reporters are rather ordinary people, and that's because you try and always understand everybody else that you're seeing, hearing, and what they're doing. You're not special. You are trained in a way to concentrate on certain things, to be able to evaluate, and to also tell other people about it. But you really don't actually expect to be at a moment of history. That tiny figure at the bottom there was being watched by a whole string of journalists. We were all on a balcony of a rather decrepit hotel here, just behind this greenery. We were on about the third or fourth floor. Several organizations had months previously, when the demonstrations peacefully began and continued peacefully, chosen this as a place to have an office, because it had a view of the famous Tiananmen Square and was also very accessible. So it was by chance, in a sense, that it was just a useful office, that we were all gathered the night after the massacre started. We were nearly all of us in a state of shock. Most journalists had tried to get near the square after midnight and been prevented. By chance, I and my crew were in the BBC office at midnight when events were phoned to us from 10 miles away, where Chang'an, the big, long east-west road that runs right through Beijing, right at the edge of it, we had a contact, a professor, who said on the phone just after midnight, there is shooting, shooting, shooting. There are huge numbers of soldiers. And we had no idea what was happening. We got out there, and a very short time later, we were further up this road, coming down a narrow alleyway with little hutong, the old traditional houses, with mud walls, some of them, still there, which came on to Chang'an. As we moved down the road, I and my crew, various other people were coming out of their houses. Hot night, they were walking out, wondering what the noise was. As we stood there, they dropped to the ground. Never seen that happen before. We peered about 200 yards down in a rather misty, rather peculiarly lit by the strange street-like, misty sight. There were trucks going past the end of the street. And we could see soldiers stood on them sideways, looking down the streets as they went past quite slowly. Then we realized they were like that. They were shooting at anything and everything that moved. Ordinary people staggering out of their houses, listening to the roar of these huge vehicles coming down. There were APCs behind them. And they were being shot dead. They were littering the road. We managed in the next 4.5 hours to get ourselves, first of all, to a small hospital. You saw the pictures there. There was one thing we could not actually film because we were threatened by people as we went into the hospital, security people, who were then hit by several of the nurses and doctors, and they were trying to get us to film it. And it was just a heap of corpses. Ordinary people, children, everything, just a heap of corpses. We got inside the hospital, and it's the only place I've ever been in where we waded in blood. I suppose that was the moment, about an hour and a half into things, that I and my crew realized we were seeing something which we had never, ever encountered before, and possibly on a scale which we couldn't imagine. And that was quite true. We had no idea that not one, two, but three armies were coming into Beijing. And they were shooting, they were attacking anything that moved from 10 miles away at the boundaries of the city, right the way in to Tiananmen Square. We learnt this later. At every major intersection, the next 2 days, we found massive amounts of damage and of injured people still lying there. There were battles with young people, ordinary householders, people coming out of their houses and being shot. And people trying in any way they could to stop this huge, great military column coming in. It's very difficult to sort of explain what it's like being in the middle of all of this. One of the things that stays with me is that how many people who'd come out of their houses, and also the students near the square and around the square, came up to us, saw our camera, and protected us. We had countless nasty fights with Secret Service, these grubby little blokes in rough clothes who were the sort of intelligence people, the police thugs, which are very common, gangs of them. Extraordinary number of people fought, took us to safety, took us to see other places. We eventually got back to the square at about 4:45 in the morning. By that time, large numbers of the military were filling one, as it were, triangular corner of the area here, ranged across there. There were thousands of students, some of whom had been asleep in the square, and others who were coming towards it, having heard the noise. It's impossible to tell how many people were killed there. One of the things that happens, which is surreal, is in that piece de camera where I'm standing approximately there in the square, not very far from this end, students were wandering around. They could not believe their army would fire at them. They could not in any way accept that there were live rounds and people were dropping in front of them. The great phrase which Chinese children are taught at school is, the army loves the people. It's drilled into them. The army loves the people. They just couldn't get it. People were mown down when most others would have run for cover. Many of them were right in the middle of the square, shouting and singing. At one point, we heard the Marseillaise. It was surreal. And all the time, people were dropping to the ground. What was happening elsewhere, we could only guess at. We could hear gunfire from many places around the city, not just in Tiananmen Square. We now know that 3 armies came in and that there was violence in many other places around the city. How we got the actual pictures out was quite simple. I ran. I had 2 cassettes in my hand. We left the crew in a ditch by one of the ministry buildings, which were concealed and darkened and not covered by the spotlights of the square. And we knew that they couldn't run fast because they had heavy camera work, and not the tiny ones you have these days. And I just set out to run. And there was a volley of shots as I did it, and I crashed into a guy, and in fact, he'd taken a bullet, and I landed over him. And I then just, I lay on the ground for a matter of seconds, and I could see bullets and tiny flicks of red hitting the asphalt and people going down. I just ran and ran. I don't know where I got the energy. But it is something to do with the fact that how important it was to get the news out. I knew that this was it. You didn't go halfway to it. You didn't stop. You actually had to get it out. And I got to the gate, to the hotel here, to find it was actually had been chained across. And I went up a wall and over it and over the other side. And to this day, all I can imagine is I turned into a chameleon and went up it and down it. I was covered in bruises and scrapes. I went over a wall, about 6 foot wall, and went down the other side. And then when I got to the door, just a few yards away, the steps of the hotel, there were 3 guards who had moved in to obviously a building in which there were foreigners. And they came for me and I went for them. And I am no good fighter, but I was desperate. I did terrible things. I whacked them, I threw one over and I stamped on one. They weren't expecting it from a daft bird. That's all I can reckon. I was absolutely mad by then. I was mad with rage. And I went up 2 flights of stairs and we had our office. And there we had contact with London. We could get the information and start getting the information out, not the pictures. We couldn't transmit that. We'd had to go through a real television transmitter, and Chinese television had closed that down weeks before. We were going to have to get the cassettes of pictures out somehow. But we got the information out. I still feel incredibly, the strongest thing I feel about any story I ever did, because I knew something about the enormous means that the Chinese government had to suppress information. Huge, and lots of experience doing it. And boy, they tried. They tried. So we knew we had to get these pictures out and get the information out to the world. There were actually some students who in the square who some spoke English and would say, "Tell the world." I've never felt more determined that you had to do that. I also feel that we have to remember it. Yes, there are great moments in history of all sorts. Things fade. But what you still have is a regime which refuses to admit one single thing about killing thousands of its unarmed, innocent citizens. It still refuses to admit one thing about it. It suppresses people who ask questions. It chases down people who inquire. If you tap it into your computer in China, Tiananmen Square incident, massacre, 1989, there will be a knock on the door the next day from the police. They will chase down where that inquiry has come from. It still denies everything. And the reason why I think we should remember is that, yes, there are reasons to have dialogue with China, to do trade with China. It's a huge and incredibly impressive society, but not in its attitude to the truth and to what it does itself. And we have to remind people that it is still holding to that, which is frightening for such an extraordinary world power with such technological ability and achievement. We have to remind them that there are other values and the value of human life. So I come back to thinking about this every year because I think it should be remembered, and particularly in order to try again to get a very, very powerful government to acknowledge what its forebears But obviously, in some instances, people in power who knew those people in power of what they did. It's hugely important. Because if we haven't got truth, and if a government does not care for its citizens, we are in very great trouble. So thank you for listening to me about it. It does so matter. And I'm thrilled there's a gathering of people here who have also come to listen to what did happen, yes, quite a long time ago. But its lesson is still with us. Thank you.